so excited about today's guest. Tariqh Akoni and I have been friends for probably about 15 or 16 years now. And he is just, aside from being a monster guitar player, one of the most amazing human beings you'll ever meet, the nicest guy. But I have to go through his list of credits because it's pretty phenomenal. He is currently the music director for Josh Groban. And he has previously worked with artists including Christina Aguilera, Alicia Keys, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Elton John, the Backstreet Boys. I could keep going on and on and on, but it's just a massive list. And Huey Lewis and the News, I got to throw that in because Huey Lewis and the News is amazing. And I'll think of a whole bunch more as we keep going on. But just a massive list of A-list artists that he's been able to perform with all throughout the world. And you've seen him play on many TV shows and many award shows over the years, house guitar player for a lot of the award shows. And Tariqh, I'm so happy to have you with us today.
I am so psyched to be here, buddy. It's always great to see your face and great to get a chance to kind of chat. And I have a lot of questions for you, maybe when we get off about Nashville and how things are going and all that stuff.
Oh, okay. Awesome. I feel like I've been answering a lot of questions about Nashville to my Los Angeles friends lately. In fact, I actually just rented out my house to a buddy of mine who's moving out here from LA because I'm moving into a different place, and so he's already secured the house here for the next year. So a lot of people are moving out to Nashville, it seems. But
I literally have four. I have maybe 3 or 4 friends who just moved out to Nashville. Let alone, obviously, some of the friendships I had before. Right. But I was blown away when I was there last how many people I knew. Like I started reaching out to people, going, I didn't realize what kind of network of friends I happen to have out there. Right. But I actually have a couple of people I want to turn you on to because they just moved down a little while ago.
Oh, fantastic! And it's not the country music town that it once was. It's really kind of becoming a new modern music community for sure.
Yeah, and I think that there's something about obviously the pandemic has really changed people's perception of where they need to be and where they need to be to do what they need to do. But I think Los Angeles is a very interesting place right now as you kind of drive through, just because of what's been going on, displaced people and whatnot. And so I think a lot of people are thinking, wow, do I have to live here, or is there someplace else I can go and record remotely and continue with my current workload and whatnot? And I have seen a fair exodus from Los Angeles, heading down to Nashville. And I love being down there, So next time I come down, we're going to have to sit down and grab a bunch of coffee.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We'll make something happen. Yeah. So I have a question that I'd love to start off with you, because I know you personally, and I know how you work. And I know your mindset of things. So, you've worked with so many artists throughout your career. And I'd love for you to share with everyone else listening, how you continue to evolve and make yourself a valuable, we'll say, asset to those who you work with and work for.
Yeah, well, I think, there are a couple of things. I think that I used to be the head of a guitar department in Los Angeles. And one of the things I used to tell my teachers was, education has to work on 3 levels. It's got to work on, a fundamental level, on a conceptual level, and on a contextual level. And so for me, even as you look at kind of your career or your life or how you're moving through different situations, there's got to be some kind of overriding concept that plays out. So even as the context changes, like whether it's the Backstreet Boys or Bette Midler or Josh Groban or studio work versus composing and whatnot, it's like there's certain concepts that flow through, and then the context might shift and change, even depending on time. Like as we were talking about with current technology, the context has changed in terms of even studio sessions, recording guitars, what you need to know to be able to record guitars. But I think from a conceptual level, there's the element of wanting to always add value, wanting to bring a bonus, wanting to always, in any situation I walk into, have something that uplifts the situation so that people value having my presence there. Right now, I've been doing a fair amount of A&R work. And one of the comments that's been made about me as an A&R person is that I kind of go above and beyond what a normal A&R person would do. But that for me is really important, is bringing these either learning additional skill sets, ancillary benefits, but those things where you can add value to any situation. And then the other part of it that is almost the converse is this idea. I was going to do a series on YouTube, and I was going to call it Nobody Cares. And what it was based on is the idea that, we all have these things that seem to get in the way of our ability to do what we need to do. And people are empathetic, but when they have a goal they have to meet, they don't really care. So for instance, there might be a very good reason that you are late one day to a session or something like that. And people will be forgiving of the idea that you were late because there's a very good reason. But at the end of the day, they still have to get the job done. So as much as they might care about you, they don't really care. They really want to know that they can count on you to show up on time, your gear's going to work. Like all of these are just, in my mind, getting out of the shower to get dressed, to get into the car, to drive to the ballpark, to get into the game. You know what I mean? It's like if you don't have those things in place, then actually being a great player in the game is not going to work out. So I try to keep those things in mind as I approach any situation, and then the third thing I'll say is early in my life and career, I had to embrace that there's a weird kind of tipping point between taking work because I needed to take work or I wanted to expand my experience and knowledge base and whatnot. But also I didn't want to take things that I thought I was going to not just do a bad job, but I didn't have a passion for and not put the energy into. Because knowing that might happen, I knew that I might develop a reputation for not putting the energy in, not bringing the bonus, not being on time, not learning the material. And I didn't want that to be part of my narrative. I wanted to make sure that I cultivated a strong narrative of, you can hand anything off to me. You can trust me. I'm going to bring you back more than you actually brought to me. And one of my favorite compliments that was ever paid to me was by Steve Travato, where he said, "Tariqh, I feel like I give you a nickel and you bring me back a dime."
Wow.
And I was like, for me, that is, if everybody you hired did that, you would be a millionaire.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry for the long and verbose answer.
No, it's great. I think one of the things that's important is it's just as important to say no as it is to say yes. And a lot of times, people are taught like, say yes to everything, say yes to everything. Exactly. I think no, don't say yes to everything. That's the worst piece of advice you can be given.
Right. Well, and there's an old saying, you say yes until you can afford to say no. But I think that one of the things that's important to remember is you obviously want to expand your knowledge base. You obviously want to sometimes punch above your weight class and put yourself in situations where, even though like you don't want to necessarily hamstring yourself from opportunity, but you also need to have a certain amount of awareness, because for me, it was a question of, if I'm not passionate about it enough to put in to do a good job, I don't want the narrative to be that I do a bad job, because there's that old saying, if you do a good job, somebody might tell a friend. If you do a bad job, they'll tell 10 friends.
Yeah.
So you don't want to start to bake that into your narrative of, Tariqh didn't learn the material. He didn't really give a shit. He, brought his gorilla amp and his, Kramer with the banana headstock, to a jazz gig or whatever,
I love that you referenced the gorilla amp. That's my favorite part of that answer, actually. I think there are definitely a couple of guitar players that can definitely we remember getting that guitar and gorilla amp for Christmas.
Yes, exactly. Well, it actually reminded me of this buddy of mine who was a great guitar player, and now he's the guitar player for the Goo Goo Dolls. But I knew him back when he played Brad Fernquist. I knew him back when he lived in Boston, and he used to play this place called, I want to say, Durgan Park. And he had this great rig and great tone and this like 9-space rack or something like that. But sometimes he'd get burned out on dragging his rack out to this club gig. So he'd show up with like his little gorilla amp and like, and a guitar. He's like, I just got to get through this gig. And the leader literally had to say to him, don't ever bring that again. So
yeah. It's like showing up with the old PV Bandit.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, I always think it's interesting, talking to aspiring musicians, and learning kind of what they perceive as success, and oftentimes it's completely the opposite of what us as full-time musicians perceive as success. And so one of the things I always like to ask everyone is you've had a lot of success, but what does being a successful musician look like to you now that this is your regular day-to-day life for the last couple of decades?
Well, it's funny because I think that there are two ways to look at that, and I'm looking down here because there's actually a book I was just reading that has a great quote. But one of the things that basically it's talking about is, I want to say two things about it. One is your mindset changes and evolves, once again, as you move through your career. But let's say you've just gotten out of Berklee College of Music with your bachelor's degree in, the hypertonic scale or something like that, and there's a perception that making it or success is superstardom. But for me, success is actually sustainability, and that sustainability to me is built by having a really positive and, sustainable narrative, a narrative being what people say about you, what people say about you behind your back, what the skinny on you is, because that's something that exists beyond you. So you don't have to be in the room if somebody's saying positive things about you, or, hey, do you know my friend Tariqh, or check out Tariqh, or have you heard his tracks, or whatever. And so having a good and positive narrative that you can kind of curate and cultivate, but also building up certain systems as sustainability. So that might be clients as a studio guitar player. It might be clients as a live guitar player. It might be, contracts or these different things that are able to kind of, once again, sustain a certain lifestyle. And then I think the trick, especially at the beginning of your career, is to minimize your outgoing expenses so that you don't have to take on that additional day job or those additional jobs that take your head out of the game and don't allow you to kind of orient yourself in the direction you want for sustainability and success in the industry. Then once you get past that, there's this kind of Robert Kiyosaki, rich dad, poor dad, cash flow quadrant mindset of not only building sustainable incomes or sustainable systems and disposable income, but also there's this mindset of, you're going to, as you get older, and let's say you get married, have kids, have a mortgage, all that stuff, your cost of living is going to go up. So you're going to have to kind of price yourself in a different place to remain sustainable. And then the hope is you can actually put money to the side and or have those big lightning rod moments or lightning in a bottle moments that allow you to kind of keep moving further down the line. But really that first step of sustainability, that for me is success. And then it's scalable. So you get to the point where it's like, okay, now you are able to actually take vacations and you're actually able to send your kids to private school and all that stuff. But that sustainability for me is success, because all I really wanted to do was make a living making music, and I never wanted to be the guy at the front of the stage, with the leather pants, although I do still have my leather pants, but I never wanted to be that guy, that was the front person for the thing. I always wanted to just create music and feel like I could have a sustainable life doing that.
One of the amazing things about kind of, you're not necessarily behind the scenes, but you're not the front guy, kind of going off of what you just said. One of the things that I think is amazing about playing behind the scenes is that it is the consistency, it is the longevity. But on top of that, if you're the artist, you might play on Saturday Night Live once. You might make a couple of records with a record label, and whatever happens, you play on Saturday Night Live one time. If you're Tariqh Akoni, you play on Saturday Night Live a dozen times with a dozen different artists, and some of those artists you play on it multiple times, and they're over many, many years. And that, the thing with being a musician is it doesn't end when you achieve that certain goal, because it's nearly impossible to go, okay, this is my passion, but now that I've reached this level, I'm going to put the instrument down and I'm not going to do it anymore.
Oh no. Well, my favorite joke is, or one of my favorites is I play guitar for free. You pay me to leave my house. Yeah. Because it's like, I would play guitar, or there's an old joke. What would you do if you won the lottery? I'd play guitar till I ran out of money. Yeah. It's like, I love playing guitar. I love making music. I would create music regardless of the situation and the atmosphere. And so then the question becomes, when you're talking about art versus commerce, is how to monetize that. Like, so we're talking about sustainability as an artistry, but there's also how do you monetize that? Like, if you like to write, what are the avenues for writing? If you want to play, what are the avenues to kind of to sustain a living doing that? And then there's the element of marketable skill sets. Because a lot of times I have guitar player friends who would ask me, hey, I wanna get into playing pop music, and there would be these incredible fusion players. And I'd be like, man, you're incredible, but how's your rhythm or how's your acoustic playing? Like, these are marketable skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
Can you sing any background vocals? Like these things that are going to lead to like live gigs or once again, adding value to these live gigs. And sometimes we put our emphasis, especially when we're in music school, in a certain narrow focus because it gets us accolades and attention for that one thing. But those things of actually making people sound better around you, that for me is actually more marketable and more sustainable from a career standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Hey, I just want to jump in here for a second and let you know that if any of your goals over the next year include recording and releasing a new album, generating placements of your songs on TV shows and films, or just building a fan base that will sustain your music career, I want to invite you to my special workshop, Real Musicians Don't Starve. Now, in this workshop, we're going to focus on the 3 keys that are essential to your success. And you're going to walk away with an extremely powerful strategy that allows you to create your own wow factor. And this gives you the power to attract musical opportunities to you instead of constantly struggling and chasing after them. Now, you can check out this workshop for free at realmusiciansdon'tstarve.com/workshop. And once again, that's realmusiciansdon'tstarve.com/workshop. Now, back to the podcast.
Taking the marketable skill set to an even deeper level, we can start including learning how to record, and having your own studio. Because it seems, I don't know any professional musician who's making a living as a musician who does not have a studio in their home. And while they're not, A-level mixers by any means, they have the full capabilities to at least track themselves, whether they're a vocalist, guitar player, keyboard player, drummers. I know a lot of drummers who have great studios and they've got great sounds, but they're not mix guys. They don't have to complete the process, but they can deliver pro quality recordings of themselves. And that is so attainable nowadays. And it's almost required.
I completely agree with you. And it's really interesting because I think one of the things that this pandemic really shone a light on was not only how far downstream some people were in that process, but like I had a lot of friends who were, classical musicians or studio musicians that played violin and, and things like that really, they didn't know what end of a microphone to plug in because they just show up at Capitol Records and microphones would be set up and they'd bring their lunch and a crossword puzzle and they'd read the chart and it would be amazing. But then with the pandemic, especially with the movie dates, suddenly they started going, we have to finish SpongeBob SquarePants. So we're going to have to send you tracks. And I had a lot of people hitting me up going, what should I get? How do I get into this? Where's this mic placement? Having to learn that process. But it's become such the thing now of like you said, not only being able to do that, but now it's become competitive about how you deliver tracks. Like that part of it of not just adding value as we're talking about before, but even that part of it of I think I was talking to you about the, nobody cares idea.
Yeah.
But even that part of it of you thinking from the perspective of the producer, the listener, the audience, the contractor, and how you deliver stuff and how the ease of interaction with you. So for instance, I have one buddy who does drum tracks for me sometimes. And the first time he sent me tracks, I was blown away because he had such a great sense of, I'm only sending you this many tracks and this is why, and he literally sent me the Pro Tools session where he had put, I think, Bomb Factory on the Room Crush because he was like, everybody owns this because it comes with Pro Tools.
Yeah.
But this is how I would perceive of it. If you want to put something better on, you can. But he kind of sent me a really clear picture of how he heard the drums, but it was malleable for me to kind of do what I need to do. And I was like, wow, that's so slick how you delivered that. But having a good concept of like deliverables, for me, I use WeTransfer and a couple of other things. But I actually get a little burned out sometimes because some people want to like use their brand new, oh, hey, this was cheaper, so now I'm using this thing to deliver files, but that means now I have to sign up
Yep.
to get the files, and then they're corrupted, or I'm like, man, what a drag. Like versus that super easy, it's almost transparent interaction. You're like, man, this guy I want to use 7 days a week and twice on Sunday.
Well, if they're not using WeTransfer is free under 2 gigabytes.
Yeah.
So
right.
it's insane not to use that.
Yeah.
And that's my main file delivery. Just zip it up, put it in a folder, zip it up, WeTransfer it.
Exactly.
And if it's over 2 gigs, part 1 and part 2.
Yeah. Right. Well, and also it lets you know when when those tracks have arrived. It's nice and clean.
Yep.
So they don't have to have like their own separate account. Like all that stuff that makes it easier for whomever's getting the tracks,
I have a friend of mine who is a great mix engineer, one of my best friends, and we've been friends for so many years. And he lives right down the street, and I'll go over to his house and we'll just hang out and have lunch or whatever. And he's like, "Oh, I just got this new session today. It's just insane." And he'll bring it up, and nothing's consolidated.
Oh.
Everything's just kind of like sporadically in there. It came with all the additional audio files that were never taken out of the session. So it's like this 13 gigabyte file for like 40 tracks that he has to mix, but nothing's it still has all the edits in there. Nothing's consolidated. And I think to myself, I'm like, this is insane. Why? It's not only that, but just the amount of time it takes to even upload that, as opposed to consolidating and then creating a new session file uploading it. But, again, it just kind of comes down to, I think a lot of times people aren't thinking of the next person along the line.
Exactly.
And the more we think about the people that are further down the line that we're serving and that we're working with, now granted he's being hired, so, but whatever, but the easier you can make their job, the more they're going to want to work with you, the better results you're going to get, the quicker the results you're going to have, in front of you.
Exactly.
And it's madness. But the funny thing is that it's, as it's so easy to do all this stuff now.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkably, but it's funny because I think that especially people from my generation, a little bit older, I think that they have this technophobia.
Yeah.
And so, I was literally just right before you and I got on the horn, a guy had called me because they're building a studio and they're talking about the keyboard player head, and they're asking me what would I suggest they do for some certain gear suggestions. And I was like, well, I know the guy, and I know that he has wanted to move in the direction of soft synths, but he's afraid of having to poke his head down the rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. But I was like, at this stage of the game, you kind of can't afford not to. You kind of can't afford to stay blissfully ignorant of, modern technology and convention, because it's almost like, being a contractor bidding for a job and refusing to use a calculator. Mm-hmm. It's yes, I agree that you are perhaps incredibly artistic, but there's a time factor, there's a convenience factor. And as you said, when you think of the next person who's going to inherit those parts or all of that stuff, if you make their job easier, they're going to want to reach back out to you all the time to go, man, he made my life so much easier. And a couple of things that I've taken on as part of my workflow is when somebody calls me for any kind of contracted gig or whatever, whether it's a studio session or a track or something like that, my first question is when do you need it? Mm-hmm. So if they say, you know what, I'm hoping to get it by this date, I'm like, great, I'll open it on this day. And if I have anything I need to reach out, I'll reach out to you regarding that, whatever. Right. That way, I don't have them calling me every other day going, hey, have you got my track? Have you popped it open? I can sit there going, this is when I'm going to put it in the queue. And if you need it sooner, I'll find a slot to put in the queue sooner. But it allows me to kind of time manage, work with different clients in a different way and all of these things. But I really want their interaction with me to be super easy, super transparent. I want the tracks to come up and everything they need is on the tracks. And if there's anything else they need, I can go back. So even as I'm organizing my my revisions, I have a file system to go, oh, let me go back to work in progress 4 when, you seem to like that fretless bass part more than, just to be able to have a way to kind of go back and keep track of that stuff. Because as you know, you wind up having clients coming in from all sorts of different sources, different time demands and all that stuff. So you're just kind of keeping their experience as easy and relaxed as possible.
Right. Yeah. You're treating it like a contractor, like an independent contractor, which is what we are, and you're funneling them into your schedule and
Yes.
keeping the ball moving forward. Because really, the goal is always the consistency. We want to stay consistent and whatnot. So let's go back to when you were first starting out in your career.
Mm-hmm.
Probably didn't know a lot of people, didn't really know where things were moving and where you're going to end up and whatnot. We talk a lot about, I really feel there are three keys to success. You got your skill set, which obviously, that as a musician that has to be on point. Then you have your mindset and you have your actions.
Mm-hmm.
And, people just take action, but the reality is that those actions, they really do follow where our mindset is. If we have negative mindset, nothing's ever going to happen for me, then of course our actions are going to follow suit. We're never going to take the right actions that are going to open up the doors, that allow us to move forward. So when you were starting in your career, I'd love for you to share like what your mindset was, how you started getting those first gigs. Not necessarily like, oh, my buddy called me, but what was the reason why they called? Because there's always something more than, well, my buddy called me. Well, your buddy called you for a reason, because obviously you have a skill set, but the mindset is there. There's an attitude of success that's foundational to achieving success.
I mean, I would agree with you. I think that I am one of the places I'm very, very lucky is I just tend to be a positive person, so I think that that's always been to my advantage because it's not something I have to put on. I mean, obviously I have my bad days and my bad moods and all that stuff, but it's not something I have to put on. And I genuinely enjoy, making music, being around musicians, entering into challenging projects, things like that. And I think that that's something that people like to have around. They like to have someone who's positive, who's a cheerleader for other people, that's like rooting for the team, all those kinds of, positive mindset things. I think that I'll say two things. One is my buddy Billy O'Connell, who's an incredible kind of music business, guru who teaches down in New Orleans. One of the things that he said I loved was thinking in terms of strategy versus random acts of improvement, and so that idea of having a plan, putting a plan in action, and even if you have to change course, that doesn't mean failure. It's just you're adapting as the situation changes. So when I first got to Los Angeles, I was lucky enough to move to come to Los Angeles with a gig. So I had a chance to hook up with Gerald Albright before I moved to Los Angeles, and Gerald had said, "Hey, listen, when you get to town, let me know, because I'm thinking about adding a guitar player to the band, yada, yada, yada." And some of the people I worked with from Gerald recommended me to like George Duke and Kenny Loggins and Tom Scott and things like this. So not Tom, but that kind of came shortly afterward. But I think one of the reasons why people continue to recommend me, as you said, is I think that I had a super, super positive work ethic. I always felt like, I didn't feel like I was a very good reader, and I felt like I was very behind with some of my acoustic playing and whatnot. So I would go back and transcribe everything and make sure I had great charts for myself. And I used to have these pink spiral books for every gig, like the Huey Lewis gig. Mm-hmm. I actually have all their songs transcribed out for what the guitar part is, all that stuff, because I was like, if they don't call me again in 6 months, I've got to go back and know what I was supposed to be playing. Right. So I'd always have these books I could refer to. So literally, Christina Aguilera, I have a book that actually has me having transcribed all that stuff. So I always had this strong work ethic of, this is what I want. I can't afford not to do this. So how do I shorten that gap between where I feel like I am as a musician and my ability to really knock this out of the ballpark and do a great job? So for me, there was that really positive work ethic. That was that really, I was so hungry for it and so hungry for the opportunity that I always wanted to, as much as possible, knock it out of the ballpark. And then to me, the granular part of that is defining what knocking out of the ballpark is like, I want to make sure my tones were in great, condition. I was showing up on time. My gear was working well. And there was a continuity of look and what's the word I'm looking for? Presentation.
Sure.
So like, as opposed to, once again, it's like we can't control a lot of things about the way we look, but if I'm doing at the time smooth jazz and R&B and all of that stuff, there's something that puts you in that category of like, how you dress, what gear you bring. Like if I show up with a flying V and a mohawk, and like, and a leather, a Harley jacket with chains, it's not necessarily congruent with that setting. But similarly, when I started doing more rock and roll and pop and all that stuff, I still have to be authentic to myself, but there might be some adaptation of that stuff. And I always had a willingness to challenge myself, to enter myself into those kinds of things. And once again, that thing of wanting to knock it out of the ballpark. And I think Tim Lefebvre had one of my favorite quotes, which is profound and profane, where he said, he said, learn the music, play the shit out of it, and don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that I can remember, that I can try to do.
But I like how you like those strategies that you implemented, they work, and the whole thing of making the books for the artists and thinking ahead, like, okay, if I'm not going to be doing this gig for another 6 months, I'm going to be filling it in with a bunch of other things. When I get the call in 6 months, I already have the book. But on top of it, just the fact that you're writing things out, 'cause I'm very much the same way. I always have notebooks for all the gigs. But by writing things out, it's a whole other way of internalizing the part, as opposed to just listening to it and going like, that's it. That's it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think for me, there's also an element where I'm not great at retaining stuff. I'm not great at, and it was a way for me to minimize what I perceived to be my deficiency. Like I'm the worst party guitar player you've ever met. Cause I can't, I can scold my way through it, but I can't necessarily go, oh, I've got 100 songs under my hands. But like I just did a show. I was just saying I was in LA for 4 weeks doing this TV show, and part of doing that show was we had to play 300 songs. We had to put 300 songs together and have instant access to 300 tunes, and all of it was charted out. And so for me, but as we know as guitar players, even if it's written out, there's a lot that doesn't get written down in terms of what guitar, what's the tone, what's the approach, even line to line. When you're looking at a master rhythm chart where like the guitar line's written up here and the keyboard line's written down here, and knowing what you're supposed to be looking at.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a part of that process that is in order to, going back to sustainable living, going back to marketable skill sets, going back to, real musicians don't starve, going back to this mindset. It's like part of my learning this and getting better at it, because I didn't feel like I was a great reader a lot of my life. But I was like, I couldn't have done that gig or done that gig and then come back and still have to do stuff from the house and not have that consume my entire life for however long if I didn't have that ability to kind of not only read that music, but also organize in a certain way. So as an example, from a professional musician standpoint, as I was organizing myself for that gig, I had to figure out, how do I put together a rig where I don't want to program 300 patches, because I'm never going to find patch 272, like when that song comes up. So how do I organize my patches in a way where I can get to it very quickly? So part of it was starting to kind of carve in from a larger perspective of, okay, what if I organize, I was using the Line 6 Helix pedal. I'm like, what if I organize it by decade? So I've got my 50s sounds. So when I hit that, it's a pedal board that includes slapback delay, spring reverb, that kind of stuff that's going to get me that stuff. 60s, let's say I've got a fuzz phase, univibe, those kinds of things. And that way, if I pulled up a chart that was like, Led Zeppelin, I'm like, oh, let me go to my 70s board. And I know I've got my script phaser and a couple of those things. And I could really quickly move through. But, those are the things that are somewhat transparent to the contractor. But their experience of you is that anything they throw at you, you're able to knock out of the ballpark.
Right.
And similarly, like, because I'm so bad at remembering songs, they didn't have to know I had, in my dressing room, my hotel room, a spiral notebook with all their charts. They just went into that when I showed up. I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it. Let's knock it out.
One thing that I know of having known you for so long is that I feel probably in the maybe 15, 16 years that we've known each other, I feel like you've probably redone your pedal board and your rig probably at least a dozen times that I've seen at least that I was gonna say that I've seen posted, like that you update, like, here's my new rig for the year. Yeah. But that kind of goes with always changing it up for the gig and fitting the gig.
Well, and I think that the truth of the matter is I have a lot of stuff. And I don't say that in a bragging way. I say that in the sense that I have, and this goes back to the mindset thing that you were just talking about, because you and I could nerd out on gear for a long time.
Right. Yeah.
But going back to the mindset thing, part of it is wanting to have the right gear for the right job. And the other part of it is, if I don't have the right gear, not being afraid to buy it for the gig.
Right.
So when I was doing the Bette Midler tour, some of her stuff was this kind of post-war jazz type of thing. And I was like, I need a hollow body arch top that I can do that Freddie Green thing. And I also wanted to have a gypsy jazz guitar, because there was some stuff that was like by Mirbis Duchesne. It's like, like literally almost like Andrew Sisters, wartime, kind of swing jazz kind of rhythm stuff. And so I didn't mind spending however much it was, knowing I was going to make this much on the end, because also that means I might get called back. And so now it's like I've, really put to advantage the fact that I invested at that time. So I actually have rigs that are based on where I am, what I'm doing, and casting for that show. So we did a tribute to Dolly Parton a couple of years ago. That's just on Netflix recently.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
for that gig, I wanted to make sure I wound up buying a 6-string banjo, because I'd wanted one for a while, but I was also like, probably a good idea to have.
Yeah.
Having my 6-string banjo, bringing the right guitars, like the right Telecaster, the right stuff that was kind of cast correctly. Did a tribute to Aerosmith 2 years ago, and for me, that's a different pedal board, different amp setup, different rig. It's like it's got to break up in a different way. I use my White Falcon for a fair amount of it, and like my Les Paul. But that for me is making those taste decisions that are modeled for that gig. So the reason I used the Line 6 Helix for the TV show was I wanted to be able to organize this stuff, because with my pedal board, I wouldn't be able to write patches. I wanted to be able to organize patches that would work for all of those things. And the way my setup is now, I have the Helix. I've also got the native HX for my plugins, so that I can literally, if I come up with a great sound here, download it into there, take it over to that gig. It's super tight and concise. And the way I have my rig set up for live streams, let's say with Josh Groban, where there's a string section, I can't be that loud because there are all those open mics. So it allows me to also control my volume, all those things that allow me to kind of be the best thing for that situation and cast myself correctly for that situation. So that's why I tend to have not only a lot of stuff, but as my workflow changes, I want to alter it to go, okay, actually, I think I need it to be this way for these different situations. And you see, I've got 2 pedal boards behind me right now.
Yeah. Well, the thing is it's not necessarily having a lot of stuff. It's investing in the tools.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, I've got tons of gear and guitars as well. And, but a lot of them were acquired. I remember I got a gig playing on a TV show, it was probably back in 2007 or whatever. And it was all 50s and 60s stuff. It was exactly like that slapback, whatnot. Right. And I ended up going to, I forgot what they call it, like Manhattan Music or something like that. It was right by the airport, but I ended up buying the old 66.
Not making music, but not True Tone. Was it True Tone?
It wasn't True Tone. It was right. It was a little small place right by LAX, but I ended up buying the 66 Silvertone. That thing you do guitar, and that's what I used on that entire show, because again, that was the sound, and as if the stuff's taking place in the 50s and 60s, and our job is to cop that sound, and showing up with a custom made, Paul Reed Smith is not going to get that sound that's authentic to it.
Yeah, like a Valley Arch with EMGs, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the fun thing is, as gear nerds, is that it justifies the investment.
No, absolutely. And I think that going back, there is a part of it where talking about bringing value to the situation or bringing that bonus, that's part of what you're getting paid for, especially as a guitar player, is I listen to way more guitar than anybody in that room. So part of what I'm getting paid for is my opinion on how to cast this correctly and how to be the best thing for that situation. And it's a thing there, once again, for a contractor, producer, all that stuff. The situation, like you get called by a producer and their expectation is like, you're going to come in going, what I think this needs is like a Nile Rodgers thing. Right. And they might be like, cool, man, let's give it a shot. And you're like, okay, let me grab this Strat. Let me go direct. Let me add a little like LA2A. Let me, you have that concept of like what that is, and you're able to inform the music and bring value to it versus everybody else that might just read the notes on the page without any inflection or anything like that. And it's like, you could get a computer to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you kind of just summed it up as far as the difference between like those who are able to become professionals versus those who, try to be or whatnot, because you can get the education,
Yes.
but it's really the personality and it's understanding the value that you can bring to the table.
Yes. And I think that you actually also really hit on an important part of that, which is, to me, education is about an acquisition of knowledge. And we hope that necessarily through experience, we are able to expand on the wisdom of it. But in order to open yourself up to those opportunities for expansion, you have to have a very open mindset. You have to embrace the idea that it's like it is an additive process. It is something where it's like when I first got called to work with LeAnn Rimes back in the day, like back in 2007 or whenever it was, I got the call to do some stuff with LeAnn Rimes, and I called Steve Travato and I said, Steve, help me. I don't know how to play country, but I just got this gig. So I was like, okay, now my goal is I've got to dig in and really study this and be the best I can for that. So for me, going back, with Josh Groban on the last tour, he was working on the record the record prior to this most recent record. He called me and said, man, I'm so excited we got Vicente Amigo to take this flamenco solo on this one song. I was like, great, man. Got off the phone, called Adam DeMonte. I'm like, Adam, help me. I've got to play this solo in 3 months, and I don't play flamenco. So I literally took flamenco lessons, bought a flamenco guitar, bought a handmade flamenco guitar, grew my nails out longer because I played a little classical. But the idea of learning how to a proper rasgueado, it's actually you're having to build up these tendons and muscles that we never use. And if you go too fast, you can really hurt yourself.
Oh,
so I was like, I need to train for 3 months to get to the point where I can do this. But to me, that's part of holding the job, having the job, taking care, curating it, someone feeling like they have comfort in handing you something and you're going to rise to the challenge. But it's a mindset as opposed to sitting there going, man, I don't do that, or whatever, going, how can I do that? How can I expand myself? And now I can take other opportunities as they come in because now it's actually something in my back pocket.
And the 3 words that are so important there are how can I, changing that mindset to, I can't do that or I don't do that to, no, how can I do it? And it's not only just in performing, but it's even in like, oh man, I really need to get this particular piece of gear. Well, I can't afford it. Well, how can I afford it?
Absolutely. And I think that a buddy of mine who's a great composer up here in Santa Barbara he said somebody asked him, do you play pedal steel? And he said, can I or will I? Because his whole thing was he's like, I don't yet, but give me some time. Let's see if I can do it, And I think that sometimes, going back to that, do you say yes? Do you say no? I mean, I think that you have to kind of really be considerate and conscientious as you approach those things. But also you want to leave yourself open to expanding the opportunity because, you're now not only showing people your work ethic and all that stuff, but now that you're expanding your ability to do these other things. Like going back to the Josh example, when we first started touring with Josh, I didn't play a lot of acoustic and or nylon string. And they basically said they wanted to bring on a nylon string specialist. And in fact, they wanted to call a really good buddy of mine who's an incredible musician. And I said, well, listen, before you do that, let me audition. Let me work on it. Let me see if I can bring it to you. And that way you don't have to hire 2 people. I can do both. So I called up my buddy, David Oakes, who now lives in Carolina. And I was like, David, help. I need to learn how to play classical guitar. So I took classical lessons, bought a new guitar, worked on my technique and tone production, auditioned the part. They're like, yeah, okay, well, let's have you do it. And now with Josh, more people know me for my nylon string playing with Josh than my electric playing with Josh. Mm-hmm. But it's something that if you embrace the challenge and you figure out how can I do this, rise to the challenge, now it's become something that people get called for. Like David Foster called me to play a Barbra Streisand record for the nylon string thing. And one of the reasons I started working with David is he felt like he could hire me and I could cover what Dean did in the studio, Dean Parks did in the studio, and what Michael Thompson did in the studio. Mm-hmm. So you start to expand your experience base and you can bring in more work in that setting.
Yeah. Always developing the skill set and providing as much value as you can and looking at how you can continue to do that. I think that's so important. Absolutely. I have one more question that I always think is an interesting question to ask, and that is if you could go back in time now have a conversation with yourself when you were just starting out, when you were maybe 20 years old.
Yeah.
What would be 2 pieces of advice that you would give yourself back then?
I would say write music or create something every day. Like, I think that creative muscle, I think for a lot of people, if it's not something that feels natural to you, it's something that they struggle to find a workflow with and get comfortable with. But I think that that's when your real voice comes out, and it's also, for me, it's actually the most rewarding thing. I mean, I don't do it every day. I should, I have like 8 Zoom meetings and I'm exhausted. So I want to, having a beer. But if I can, it's part of my regimen, which is, if I have a day in the studio, it's like I sit down, I get my voice memo on, I come up with 4 ideas of things that I just kind of riff on and then I figure out which one I'm going to chase down and create something based off that. That's kind of my workflow, every day. But I think that that's something I wish I'd done more of as a young man, and then I think the second advice I'd probably give to myself, I think the second thing I'd probably say would be this sounds weird and somewhat weirdly technical, but is to create on the guitar through an amp every day. Because I was so self-conscious about practicing. I'd always practice acoustically, and then I'd plug in, and then I'd be a little self-conscious because it'd be so loud, and I had to then deal with that issue and all that stuff. And I wasn't the kind of person that just picked up guitar and like played something every day or just jammed on the guitar. And I think that really getting in touch with that right brain thing every day and seeing the guitar as a tool for creation versus a tool for acrobatics or any of that stuff is a really important distinction. And I say that also because I think the current paradigm and also the emerging paradigm is based on content creation. So if you make that part of your process, and if you're actually super adept at it, super facile with it, you leave space in more rooms to be present. Where whether it's collaboration, whether it's writing individually, whether it's people wanting you to, whether it's top line or just write a guitar riff, or even in the studio. For me, some of the best studio musicians are guys who came out of creative bands, and they approach something from kind of almost a little askew. Like you look at Rusty Anderson and Rusty with Edna Swap, or you look at Lyle Workman, or you look at Joel Shear, who I love, but I mean just super creative guys in the studio. Or Dave Levita, and his work with was it Pedestrian? I have to think back. But my point is simply, I think that there's a creative thing of using the guitar as a paintbrush, that if you focus on just the acrobatics of it, or once again the hypertonic or super Phrygian or or whatever, you lose sight of the idea that it's a creative element for sounds, ideas, riffs, chords, that kind of creative thing.
Right. And effects like running through a pedal board and all the delays and all the other cool things play a big role in creating the music and the emotion of the music, as opposed to just the actual notes.
Yeah, and I think that you also, when you integrate it from that standpoint of creation, and like you said, whether it's pedals, amps, all that stuff, there's a way that it inspires you a different way than if you're just sitting with a guitar in your lap and you're there's something important about that of does it still communicate, but there's something about that and being comfortable with that creative thing that you are able to add value in those different situations of collaboration. You're able to kind of come at stuff and bring stuff to you. Because even sometimes, it's like if I'm not playing through my pedal board all the time, then I'll sit there going, I'll just throw on a quarter note delay and I'll just do something here, versus, hey, let me get in and paint. Let me push. Let me pull. And that was something I always struggled with my larger racks, was I didn't feel as inspired to just dime a knob, on the rack.
Yeah.
It's like, it kind of had stuff where it was like, oh, wait, I've got to get this timed in and just really nice and, and all that stuff. And it's like, I like that smearing stuff and making it a little messy and, like finger paints versus calligraphy.
Right. That's a good point. Before we wrap up, I want to bring back something that you were talking about before we even started, before we hit record. Yeah. And I thought it is really nice. And I'd love for you to share it. You were explaining how now you spend your day. with how you wake up and now the studio and dinner and the thing. I'd love for you to share that because that to me is one of the things that I personally love about being in the space that I'm in. Yeah. And I would love for you to share your perspective of it.
Of course. Well, and I think, it's funny. I'm 50 years old now. And when I was younger, I was existing off of top ramen, and maybe with a packet of whatever. So it's like I could put in, 8 hours, 10 hours a day of practicing, or because they didn't have a job, didn't have a gig. It's like that's kind of what I did. Didn't have a TV. But now it's like I've actually got a life and a home and a family. So when I have downtime, I want to spend it with my family. So in order to do that, I want to focus the time that I've got in the studio and kind of maximizing my time in the studio. So now my day is I tend to wake up in the morning, maybe 8 o'clock, but at somewhere around 9 o'clock, I'm out drinking coffee with my wife, and we kind of talk about what the day looks like and what our plans are, what meetings we have and whatnot. I'm normally in here by 10 a.m. and I typically work from 10 to maybe 6 or something. If I'm not working on something that is additional hours, I'll be in here from 10 to 6, and then I leave here, drink coffee and watch trash TV with my wife, or have dinner, watch trash TV with my wife. And for me, that's a source of balance I always wanted, and so for me, part of do you mind if I speak on that just a little bit more?
Keep going. Love it.
Yeah. So for me, balance was something that was really important. This is my second marriage, and it wasn't because of my lifestyle that I got divorced in the past, but it definitely didn't help, because I was obsessed with work and I was always on the road and all of that. And so I wanted to figure out how to have balance, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the luxury of not being productive, So the real question for me was then time management, to be able to go, how do I get all these things done, but still be able to leave it in the studio and actually have my life outside of here? Because I've got a stepson and a granddaughter and these things that I want to be able to give my attention to and my time to when I leave the studio. So we not only, have that time together, but also we go camping. We are able to take vacations. We're able to actually have, balance in life because I have worked out a way to kind of stay productive. And one of the things that's played into that is even the studio rig in here, I no longer use a tower. Now I run off of a laptop. So that way, if I bring my laptop, my hard drives, my Apollo Twin, and maybe I've got my keyboard around here somewhere, but a portable keyboard, I can work anywhere. So I can actually track in a hotel room. I have literally done stuff, while we're camping. I've taken Zoom meetings. I've finished tracks. There's a lot that I can do and integrate it into my current life versus feeling like if I'm not sitting here in front of my keyboards and my big speakers and all that kind of stuff, that I can't get the job done. And so I found ways to keep my system somewhat portable and modular. So basically when I get in here, I'm plugging into the big rig, but I could conceivably come to your studio, plug in my rig, use some of my sounds, and we can kind of stick and move and finish a project. And that for me was hugely important, is my workflow, so I could have this balance and sustainability.
Yeah. And, it's funny because you bring up the whole thing about going to the lake and whatnot. I last night actually was watching TV, and I got a text from an artist that I know asking me to play a show with them in like a month and a half. Mm-hmm. And we had already booked, 5 days camping out on the lake where I take my boat and stuff like that. And, it's one of those things that got me thinking. I was telling my wife about that when we were sitting on the sofa last night. I said, it's funny because 15 years ago, I would have taken this, because 15 years ago, I would have needed the gig and all that kind of stuff. And it's nice to be able to get the opportunity, but to be able to go, no, this doesn't fit into the game plan right now, because balance is so important.
And that's hugely important. I think your point of fitting into the game plan, going back to the idea of having a strategy versus these random acts of improvement. And I think that sometimes we feel like if we don't take that gig, we're missing an opportunity for that next random act of improvement versus it doesn't fit into my game plan or my strategy of how I'm going to move the ball forward. So as an example, I used to do those gigs at Cafe Cordial. I used to play at Cordial, when I moved back to...
I remember those.
Yeah. When I moved back to Santa Barbara, I've been back here since 2010. And when I moved back to Santa Barbara, I wanted to stay in the mind of people. So I was like, I'll book a gig once a month in Cafe Cordial because they used to send out those cards that said who was playing. And, that way people knew that I was coming back into town. And one thing that Lisa said to me, my wife, she said, honey, I support you doing this gig, but realize it's not one day a month. It typically takes, because you're writing charts for everybody, you have to rehearse the band. So it's typically a week to do a gig. And she goes, that's a quarter of your time. She's like, is it worth a quarter of your time to do this gig? And I really had to sit there going, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
Am I getting the benefit, I think, for the amount of time I'm putting into it, and time away from her, time I'm not devoting to other stuff that could have, more legs? And not that it wasn't, but I decided at one point it wasn't. And so I kind of pulled back from it. But sometimes you have to put stuff up on the shelf and really get some perspective to go, am I getting what I want? Is it scratching the itch I want? Is it doing what I think it's doing? And is it worth the squeeze,
Yeah. Those were the one night only gigs, right?
Yes,
Is that what they're called?
Yes, exactly.
I remember those.
Well, can I tell you a really quick story about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the first gig we did, that was a gig like that. I did a jazz thing, and I called, Eric Marienthal and my buddy Mel Davis, and I think my friend Mark Stevens and somebody else, and we all committed to this gig at Cordial. I was like, cool, book it. And then literally the next day, the drummer goes, can't make it. I had to book another thing. So I called John Ferraro to come and play drums, and I called the band Easily Replaced. Because I was like, and I remember one time I did a one night only gig, and it was my gig, and I couldn't make it, and so I got Alan Hines to go down and play guitar that night.
Uh-huh.
And I remember, all night long, Alan's like, "Hi, it's the Tariqh Akoni band. I'm Alan Hines."
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Only you can do your own gig, but not show up for it, right? That's amazing.
Yeah, just subcontract out my own gig. Yeah,
that's when you know you've made it.
Well, or you're insane. You're clinically insane. Yeah,
that's so funny. Well, I love to end every podcast episode with our manifesto, and that is: real musicians are business owners, and our business is music. Business is simply an organization where value is where value is provided in order to make a profit. And unlike starving musicians who operate with a mindset of scarcity and fear, as success-driven musicians, we operate with a mindset of abundance, confidence, and service. We are doers, we are dreamers, we are creators, and we are achievers. We know that our true value is determined by how many people we serve and how well we serve them, because our truth is real musicians don't starve. So that's our little manifesto that we have.
I love that.
Thanks, Tariqh.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, what a fun conversation. So great to get a chance to just to kind of dig into some of that stuff, and even just to catch up. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've always enjoyed talking to you, and I miss playing with you. And it's been a long time since those those gigs in I think they're that second floor place in Beverly Hills, if I recall correctly.
Oh my gosh! You mean the Backstage Cafe? That
was that what it was? Backstage Cafe. It was Daniel Pearson.
Say again.
It was Daniel Pearson was playing bass, and yeah. That was so that place was owned by but I want to say, was it Miles Copeland? It was like one of the Copeland brothers. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it was that event was curated by Pumpkin Pie. Do you remember this?
I do remember that now. Yes. Oh my gosh.
Well, I'm taking you all the way back, man. Yes.
That is funny. Well, I appreciate you sharing just a wealth of knowledge and experience. And, it's so important to learn from those who are actually out doing it. There's a lot of people who you can, learn from, but, I figure why not learn from the people who are actually out there doing it and making a living and who have a long, career to and lots of experience to show for it. And so I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge with everyone.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I just love talking to you. So, I mean, we can do this off air whenever you want. We'll just have to catch up. And, I drink coffee every morning. So if you ever want to join me for a little coffee, we can just catch up for the day.
That sounds like a game plan. You're 2 hours behind me. So that actually works out very easy for me.
There we go. Perfect.
Awesome. All right. Cool. Thanks, Tariqh.
My pleasure, buddy. Take care.
You too.